It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
There we go. Right?
So, listen, the reason I want to have you on, and I'm glad we could schedule you, we have not talked since this situation happened at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial between the Covington High School boy and this Native American Nathan Phillips and what happened. I've got one headline here. Kentucky town reels from fallout over viral National Mall face-off. The actual town where Covington Catholic School for Boys is Park Hills, Kentucky. And basically, this entire community has been, really involuntarily pushed into this national debate on, what's racist and what's not racist. What was your reaction to those events, Dr. Farrell?
My main reaction was seeing how overall the boys handled themselves beautifully, and and we were talking about how the boys were attacked because they wore MAGA hats or they were white or whatever, but no one pointed out that if those were girls, I doubt the attacks would be significant on them. They were really restraining themselves, and I think part of the reason for the attacks is that it's boys doing it, and so therefore the boys are blamed. And if they happen to be conservative, that magnifies the blame. And so it's part of the whole era now that we're in of the hashtag Me Too was completely focused on what males who were misbehaved did to women. There was no focus on the firefighters that are risking their lives all over the country, saving homes from being burned down, and being away from their families for months at a time. This is the core of what masculinity is about. Every single generation has had its war, and every single generation has sent thousands to millions of men to die in those wars, and we're not acknowledging that. We're not acknowledging the fact that those homes that were at the risk of being burned down were built by men who are construction workers who die at the rate of one per workday hour in the United States every single workday. And the Gillette ad, of course, is critiquing men without saying anything positive, and the American Psychological Association is critiquing men without saying anything positive. And so we're in this whole era where since the Boy Crisis book came out, I've gotten maybe 300 or 400 letters from fathers and mothers saying that my son is now in 7th grade and he's being taught by teachers of the toxicity of masculinity and how how boys are just filled with male power and male privilege, and they're sexist, and he just comes home feeling like, I feel like I was born with the wrong gender, and that I'm being blamed before I'm even being listened to. And part of toxicity of masculinity, it's explained, is not expressing his feelings. So I do encourage him to talk up and say what he's feeling, and so he does talk up. And then he's told, he's just mansplaining, and so he feels like he's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. And other parents write me their children a little bit older, and they say, my son has a lot of interest now in women, but he's afraid to ask women out because if he moves too quickly, he's considered a sexual harasser. If he doesn't move quickly enough, he's considered a wimp, and he's just confused.
Do you think all of this is really about destroying the family at all? Because if men can't be women, if men can't be men, like who they are, if there's something wrong with who they are naturally, isn't that like trying to completely reshape what is the normal family unit?
Well, first of all, the key problem to when I did the research for the Boy Crisis, I tried to identify 10 causes, or I tried to identify causes. I ended up with about 10 causes, but the more I researched, the more I saw that the single biggest common denominator among boys in all 63 of the largest developed nations, all of whom have boys falling behind girls, in every single academic subject, that the common denominator of the boys who were in boy crisis mode was dad deprivation. I looked at the studies of the ISIS recruits. They are almost all dad-deprived boys. I looked at studies of, I studied myself, the backgrounds of the mass shooters, almost all dad-deprived boys. I went to Washington, D.C., studied the prison system, and found that it was not just that 93% of the prisoners are males, but that more than 90% of those males are dad-deprived boys. When boys don't have fathers involved with them in a significant way, when the intact family is broken down, that's when the nation falls apart, and it's costing us billions and trillions of dollars, to say nothing of the fears we have about the next mass shooting, the next ISIS problem. And so this is the breaking down of the nuclear family, or the intact family, is probably the single biggest unrecognized crisis that this country faces, and the boy crisis that has resulted from that.
We're talking with Dr. Warren Farrell. Again, he's the author of the book called The Boy Crisis. He's done an incredible amount of research here. We've had him on the show once before, and it was just a very, very well-received. Got a lot of feedback on this on the interview we did last time, Dr. Farrell. You mentioned the Gillette ad. I mean, if there's anything that really I think should alarm us, it's how a company whose customers are men. I mean, speaking of fathers, I mean, it was my dad that first taught me how to shave. You know what I mean? I remember that. And so you're taking a product that represents men. That is the razor or the men's razor for facial hair, which is something that is generally specific to men, and they use it as an opportunity to tear men down. And somewhere in the corporate world, some ad agency was able to convince them to do this. I find that just absolutely alarming, because we now have people, making ads that are clearly outside their economic interests, all for some sort of, some sort of altruism that the majority of the country rejects.
Yes, and it's a blindness to, of the ad creators for the Gillette ad to understand that so many people in liberal circles don't realize that there are other people that think differently than they do. And so the attitude of males are all part of the patriarchy, they all have male privilege and power, has been so deeply ingrained in liberal communities, in the advertising community, that there is not an understanding that other people could be offended by this, and that there could be, and that maybe if you are going to be critiquing men and saying yes, you want to have men to be the best they can be, you could acknowledge that some of the toxicity, what is called toxicity, that's involved in masculinity, is as a result of the sacrifices that men have been required to make. When you create heroic intelligence, that can be at odds with health intelligence. When our son goes out and he wants to play football, and we know that if he is a great football player, the good news is that he'll have extremely good discipline. He'll have a great deal of ability to make decisions very quickly based on every single play changing. He will learn a series of skill sets that are extraordinary, which are all skill sets that are built toward having heroic intelligence. But he also may get a concussion. He may also be depressed and have a drug overdose. He may also be involved with becoming overweight. These are all outcomes of playing football, and they're all outcomes of denying what one needs to deny oneself in order to make a sacrifice that is part of being a hero. So being a hero is complex, and if we had a different message and we said, for millions of years, we have needed men to die in war, to be disposable, so our country wouldn't be under Nazi rule, and yet now we have the privilege to be able to help our sons take care of themselves as well as take care of the country. And if we have a dialogue about what's the balance between encouraging my son to learn all the skills that come from playing football versus the challenges to his health that he may have in concussions and spinal cord injuries and obesity and opiate addiction. And so, where do I want to find that balance? And who is my son? And what is his personality? And how important it is to have a dad in the picture to help guide him with a strong but sensitive and loving role model to be that best man that he can be. This is a discussion we should be having.
You raise an interesting point, Dr. Farrell, about men, about being disposable in terms of history, in terms of fighting wars. And so it just dawned on me, as a father, let me ask you this, as a father, are men supposed to prepare their sons for war? I mean, it isn't, and if we're not doing that, meaning the potential, and if you're not doing that, and as a society right now, we're rejecting those things that make boys men, doesn't that make us weaker as a country in terms of looking at the prospect of having to go to war someday?
It does, it may and it may not, meaning that if we're preparing our boys to fight in war, and there is a war that comes up and it requires the type of fighting that wars have particularly had in the past, then not having a significant percentage of people, men and women, prepared for that is bad. Now, but liberals deny that there is a difference between men and women that isn't just social construction. But if we look at all of history and animals and birds and insects, we see that there's a very strong biological difference between men and women. There's an overlap. There are some women who are potentially prepared to be in the fighting in war, and there are some men who are going to be naturally oriented toward being gay, and there are other men who will be sort of artists. And so it's important that as parents that we not just force our children into a mold of you have to be this or you have to be that based on your sex, but it's also important for people to understand that 90% of men and women are going to have certain propensities that are different from each other.
Yeah.
That come from their biological starting points.
Yeah, when I say prepare for war, what I really just mean is if you're strong, if you can, you attempt to protect or take care of the weak. And typically, in America, when we fight wars, that's the reason we're doing it. It's a lot more complicated than that, obviously. But when I say, raise your son or, prepare them for that potential sacrifice, obviously you hope that it never comes to that. But I don't even think. I guess my point would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're the one that's done the science on this or done all the research on this, is so much of what I just talked about, preparing for war or a potential conflict or having to lay down your life, that really is just something that happens naturally between a lot of father and sons generally. Like you said, there is some overlap, but it seems that we're trying to tear that down by saying that we got to fight the patriarchy, and this is all oppressive towards women. And, there's a lot of women that don't feel that way. There's a lot of women that want a strong, let's just go ahead and say stereotypical male. They actually find that attractive.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. The great majority of women do find that attractive. And, you don't see, and particularly if you take that protector role and not only put it in the disposability area. Women, then you definitely, it's very rare that a woman who's planning to have children will say, gee, I want to, this guy on the unemployment line is very sensitive and sweet. I think I'll choose him to be my husband. Almost always, if they're reading I'm okay, you're okay on the unemployment line, he's not eligible. And if he's earning less than she does, and she projects that he will always be earning less than she does, very few women are interested in marrying that type of man once they're interested in having children. It's the male-female role. Really, we hear, for example, that from liberals that men have male privilege because they earn more money than women do. They don't understand that men do not earn more money than women do. Dads earn more money than moms do. It is only when men become fathers and women become mothers, that the male is far more likely, the dad is far more likely to focus on earning in the workplace, and so therefore he quits his job as a musician or as a artist or even as a teacher, and becomes an administrator instead, or quits education altogether and becomes an insurance salesperson. And he does that, and as he does that, he earns more money, but he's giving up his passion to do something that he feels will help his children have a better life than he has or had. And so it's not understanding these core differences between men and women, of which there's a lot of overlap, and we should allow for that overlap, and it's healthy when we do. But when boys, what I've found in doing the research for the boy crisis is when boys do not have a father to be involved in helping them get postponed gratification, have boundary enforcement that dads tend to do. When there's a lack of boundary enforcement, no matter what we want our boy to be, whether it's a soldier, a breadwinner, or an artist, the boy can't achieve that, because without the boundary enforcement, he doesn't learn how to do what he's required to do. And when he's required to do something, then he gets the discipline to do it, and whether that is the discipline to be an artist, a writer, or a soldier, that's all part of the same process of discipline.
Yeah. Wow. Again, we're talking with Dr. Warren Farrell, the author of The Boy Crisis. You should check it out at Amazon. I'm wondering if there's going to be a backlash against this man-hating that is being crammed down our throats by certain institutions, entertainment, Hollywood, the far left. Are you familiar with Generation Z? I've been doing some research on the generation that's after the millennials, and it seems like they're kind of revolting in their own way. It's almost like they're the counterculture now.
Yes. I think, as I'm sure you know too, all human beings, we have a part of our brain called the RCZ, the rostral cingulate zone, and that part of our brain is very receptive. It gives us a lot of dopamine, the feel-good drug in our brain, whenever somebody compliments us or whenever we agree with somebody, we have a chord with them, and it makes us very fearful of disagreeing with somebody. So, and that's part of what creates a pendulum swinging in one direction or the other. And we've had this pendulum swinging toward toxicity, to the blaming of men, and the calling of almost everything that's masculine toxic. And now, and particularly in liberal circles and in universities and in the social science departments in universities and schools of social work, you cannot be in those schools and say good things about men without getting a huge amount of negative feedback. When the American Psychological Association recently put out their guidelines, which was very critical of men and traditional masculinity, when I participated and spoke with that group at one point, the group that created those guidelines, and there was no room for saying anything positive about men without getting criticized, without being called sexist, without basically being called a name. And so we've moved the pendulum very heavily in that direction, and yet we tend to move it back for brief periods of times. If we have a 9/11 and we see that 99% of the first responders are men, people willing to risk their lives, but even when we have firefighters being almost 100% men and about 75% of them being volunteer firefighters, we see thank you firefighters, but we don't hear a larger discussion of how wonderful it is to have men be willing to sacrifice their lives to save the lives of strangers. Men saving our homes, building our bridges, building our lands, building our skyscrapers, building our infrastructure, being the ones that create the sewers. When we flush the toilet, we're able to get rid of our waste, which wasn't always true a couple hundred years ago. And we have privileges now through technology and other things that are created at a 90% plus level by men, and we're not acknowledging them at all.
And bringing this full circle.
How entitled.
Yeah, bringing this full circle. I mean, to the Covington high school kids on the steps, with this grown man coming up to this child. and yet they didn't actually do anything. You know what I mean? They actually behaved really well compared to maybe how some other people might react in that situation.
Absolutely. Those boys should have been the subject of national respect and pride. My guess is that they restrained themselves in part. I will bet that most of those boys had intact families with fathers and mothers, where they're able to learn the difference between being assertive versus being aggressive, and that's really one of the great contributions of fathers and mothers working together to raise their children. And we really have. I was part of the feminist movement at the beginning before I saw some of its demonization of men and the undermining of the family. But part of feminism all along was the advocacy, as with Lenin, with destroying the nuclear family, assuming that the nuclear family was about men being in power and oppressing women, which it was completely not that at all. It was about men risking their lives to protect women and children, just like moms risk their lives to bear children and to raise them. Parenting was never about privilege and power. It was always about making sacrifices in order to have our children have a better life than we have.
Dr. Warren Farrell, it is always a pleasure to have you on. I appreciate your wisdom, sir, and I hope you have a great day.
It's a pleasure talking to you, too.
All righty, folks, we're going to take a break and be back here in just a moment.